Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're gonna be working on the blue Razor Drift go-kart, and as you guys know, in the last video we actually drifted it and it went decent, but we ran into an issue with something burning out, whether it was the motor or the controller. I tried different controllers, but it would not turn on the motor again. I ended up getting a new swap kit, but that's not going to be the premise of today's video. I'm actually going to show you guys the step-by-step process for doing an axle flip. The typical Razor go-kart has the axle at the bottom. Currently I'm swapping it to be at the top. If you guys aren't familiar, or you are familiar with how these chassis are, the axle is bolt-on, like for the bearings here. What I'm doing is unbolting it, flipping it so that the rear portion of the cart is lower. What that does is it actually adds traction by lowering the center of gravity. So there's so much weight in the rear that once we lower that and plant it more, it should add more grip and help us when drifting, so that the front can float, do whatever, but the rear will take a little bit more oomph to actually drift. That way we're not spitting out as much. But currently this is the state that I'm in for the axle flip. Typically the motor sits about here but flip the other way, and the chain runs through this section here. When you flip the axle from bottom to top, you're gonna have your sprocket over here because it was over here, and your brake is gonna be right here. So what you're gonna have to do is, like, whatever this tool is called right here, and get those cotter pins out so you can take off this bearing bracket for the axle, and then you can take off the sprocket and then take off the brake and then swap them. It'll be harder to fit the motor over there. My reason for swapping these is so that the drivetrain can be more centered in the rear. The thing is that this is the brake bracket at the bottom that you can just unbolt. This is where the nuts are for it, but it's like a welded piece in the top. So you could use the brake right here, but the thing is that this bracket sticks out, and to make the driving experience more comfortable, I actually have a new seat that also pushes way back, and so it would interfere with the seat. I think the seat comes like right here. This is the seat that I got right here. When you put it in, see, I'm gonna have to trim the middle a little bit so that it can fit over this middle bridge here. It'll sit just in front of this downward slope, roughly right there, which is way further back than the stock seating position, and it is more of like a caved in seat versus the stock seat, which kind of like slopes you forward. So I have more leg room. Now with that, it would be harder to put the brake bracket in the middle, and it will just clear if you put it on the side here. I have to mount the motor, which will roughly sit like that. One bolt will be on this high risen area. It'll just clear the axle there. It'll just be in line with the spindle, and then it will come off the chassis a little bit because that's just the only way I can get it to fit. But what I'll do is I'll cut more of this steel bar and create a clamp that will go right here. What's cool with this motor kit that I got, it has the forward and reverse switch right here, and then it has the 3-speed. So what I'm gonna actually do for this controller, since it's a throttle grip, is take off this grip. That way I just have the controls gripped onto this part of the steering wheel, and then I'm gonna run the stock throttle. So I have the throttle here specifically, and then I have all my controls on the other hand. Switch on the fly with one and control the cart with the other. And then on the left bar will be like an e-brake, which will be directly linked. So it'll be nice and tidy. I haven't decided on a place for the controller yet, but I'm thinking of coming up with a bracket that will make it sit right up here. That way there's not a whole lot of chaos and wires up here, even though it probably could distribute some weight, but it's not that heavy to where it would matter that much. But that's essentially the rear axle swap. There's a good chance it works, and there's always a chance that we'll come across more hurdles and we'll get there. But if you guys are interested in doing this swap, at least I'm providing you guys the information, because I don't know anyone else that has done this swap before. I'm trying to kind of pave that path for people to get into go-kart drifting with such a simple thing that's pretty much a ready go-kart, as long as you do a few things. And we're going to work on it, see how it goes, and hopefully it turns out all right. What's up, guys? I think this is going to be a continuation of a video I've already started, but basically I'm going to update you guys on the axle swap that I'm doing. This is it in its final form. The wheels aren't bolted down yet, but I have the motor mounted. The axle is bolted down, as well as the brake, and then all that's left is to do the chain, connect the cable to the new brake right here, and then mount the seat, mount the controller, mount the battery, and that's it. Like, the hard part's already done. So just finding a place for everything else should be pretty easy. I know I kind of like described a few things about what I was going to do, but now I can show you guys the product and the explanation for doing the certain things because of how the axle fits on top of the go-kart versus being at the bottom of the go-kart. You can't really just directly bolt it back on because you have these guardrails on the side right here compared to the bottom, since they are welded at the top up here. And so you have to shave a little bit of your bracket, your mount, to accommodate for the welds of the bar to the on the side of the go-kart. Once you've done that, you can pretty much directly bolt it straight to it. And initially I wanted to put an additional steel plate underneath the bolts, because when you have this axle sitting underneath the go-kart, you have this entire plate to take the beating if you hit a bump. But when you flip it, you just have these little screws that could punch right through. After looking at it, the metal under here is actually like pretty thick, and I do think it is pretty strong metal. So what I am going to do is actually only get bigger washers for these outside bolts, just to spread out the load when taking impact. But for these, you can't, because you're limited by space over here. You probably could if you trim down the washers, but that just seems like a little overkill just for something that's not going to be as necessary, since the metal is pretty sturdy underneath. The placement for everything is really up to you. I decided to put the motor in this location. It's really close to the axle. It doesn't quite touch. It wasn't supposed to touch here, but I think I bolted down the motor enough to where it actually does touch the frame right here, which doesn't bother me, because I know that if it's lifting, then my mounts down here are getting weaker. I was luckily able to fit it back here without doing any modification to the rear bar and extending the chassis. But what I did was I drilled a hole in this lifted plate and just did a bolt straight there. So I added like washers and a steel plate to support some more washers right here. Also, these two bolts are supported by the one bolt that is counter strengthening it on the other side. So I have another little plate down here. It's definitely just rigged, like, it's really sturdy, and there's definitely better ways to do this, but these were my resources. This is essentially doing it without welding on a plate. In order to get these bolts to fit, you have to like drill out or kind of like carve grooves into the tubed frame so that they could line up with the motor mounts. Heat dissipator isn't really a necessary thing to have, but I've run into the issue before of motors or controllers burning out. So for aesthetic reasons and for some hopefully minor performance enhancements by not killing these motors, since I'm trying to do these go-karts on a budget. The reason I put the motor here, you could put the motor over here, but I think when I did this, it was really tight to have the brake here and the gear over here. For the brakes, this seems to be the best method. What I did, man, I just don't know if you could see it, but basically this is the corner of what it looks like, but I shaved off like the corner, and I shaved off a little bit of the bracket so that they wedge into each other. It's hard to tell, but basically it's cut until the nut. I did that so that it could be flush or have proper spacing from the brake pad to the aluminum piece that it clamps onto. There's no OEM bolt holes here, so you have to drill them, and I added a spacer on the one that dips down over here, little metal spacer. I think it came off of the motor. I think there was a black spacer that went like right here or something between the sprocket, and so I ended up using that, and it ended up being perfectly spaced out. It tilts a little bit, but it makes it actually quite even. But as long as it gives it proper space to spin and rotate, that's all that matters. After that, you could do whatever you really want with the brake system. You have your cable, you could run it to your steering wheel here. But what I'm deciding to do is I got this little dirt bike handle off of like Temu or Alibaba or whatever, one of those like cheap sites. It doesn't perfectly fit on the rail here, so I have a little rubber piece that came from like, sometimes the little rubber pieces come in kits like this for bikes. So I used a little rubber piece like that I had laying around, and it clamps onto the bar well enough. I don't have it fully tightened because I think I'm actually going to move it forward more. And I think just having the brake separated from the wheel will add some stability and just easier driving, because you're really clamping on the steering wheel when you try to brake, and it disrupts your steering direction, especially when you're drifting, and you don't want that. And I think with pull e-brake, you'll get a lot more leverage out of it. So that's essentially, that's all there is to it, to the axle swap on a Razor ground force drifter. Of course, it's going to take a lot of modification, but if you're doing this kind of modification, you're doing the full build at that point. You might as well just go all out with bigger motor, bigger battery, a more legit braking system, legit tires, all that stuff, because it's a lot of work. And so, a lot of people can get away with just doing a bigger motor, running it like this, but when you have bigger tires, you're drifting, you're going to be putting a lot more into the build of one of these things. It's worth doing a full thing versus just making something that's like halfway done. So do I think this upgrade is worth it? I don't know yet, but I think it will be worth it, because when you lower your center of gravity, it adds grip, stability, a lot of things that this go-kart, when I tested it last, it did not have. And especially being everything's further back, it should grip up a lot more, because it being so high, it was so easy for it to the rear just to spin out. And I think that was the issue, is that there was so much pressure on the steering since it was so forward driven, that I think this is really going to just absolutely change the way this go-kart feels, and one of those things that it's a must to do if you want to drift one of these things or have fun with them, because like the way it drives initially, it just like you're sliding forward on the seat and it just like you have no grip at all. Initially I had a 48 volt conversion on this thing. We went to 60 volts, more grip, more power, bigger battery. This thing should be a load of fun, so I'm really excited. I hope you guys are excited. That's gonna be it for this video. Hopefully this video is not too long, but at the same time, if you guys have any questions, please let me know, because I did a lot of figuring out here and I don't think anyone has done this before. But hopefully the testing soon will prove that you really need to do this mod if you have one of these and you're trying to take this somewhat seriously, because these are going to be an awesome budget-friendly go-kart option at some point. When I finish this is going to be the testing mule. We're going to replicate it on this one. And we have 2 tandem go-karts